Hey guys, I'm excited today because I'm not gonna have to like find where I was on a page. So I'm almost always a bit wrong, but we start on chapter 26, which is titled Disunity Day. And actually I was looking last night and there's about it's epilogue. What difference is that? Okay, this much left. And then this are source notes. So we're getting there. Um, I wonder if part 4 then is the final part, if it's 4 sections or 5, but we'll see. Oh, you like this? I was trying to clean somewhat on my bedroom floor, and I found this. I thought, "Oh, pajamas." I actually thought about wearing this, like, white and red hat with it, but I thought, "No, just this little, fruit bow I have. That'll work." Alright, got my coffee, got my perfect water, book, my pair. Let's go. Hi, John. Okay. Jerry. La Jerry. I started watching that Wednesday last night. Uh, I made it all the way up to episode 4. There's only 4 up out of I think there's another 4 coming in like a month from now. Anyway, I was having fun with it. I remember I liked the first one, but it was a while ago, so I don't totally remember it. The moment Joe Yak heard that crazy Joe Gallo was up for parole, he went to Joe Colombo and said, "Larry's dead." If Larry was still around, maybe he could keep Joe under control, but he's gone, and Joe will never come in. We'll have a lot of trouble with him. The only thing to do is hit him as soon as he comes out. Columbo again held off, assuring Yak that Albert Kid Blast Gallo could bring Joey in, meaning Kid Blast, who Columbo was currently getting along with, could convince his brother Joey to submit to Columbo's authority. When Crazy Joe went away in 1961, he was an energetic 32-year-old rebel hero who took on the mafia's establishment. When he was released in April 1971, he was a worn down 42-year-old flunky with no money. He looked like a different Joey Gallo altogether, said Pete the Greek, who collected Joey from prison along with Kid Blast and Louie, the Syrian Hubella. I couldn't get over how bony his face had gotten. What's a flunky? I feel like I want to look that one up. Am I a flunky? A liveried manservant or footman? Oh no, y'all are flunkies. Manservant. Oh, I like that. Mm, someone that does all the dirty work. On the car ride home to Brooklyn, Joey asked Blast how he felt about Columbo's leadership. Blast told Joey that he and their crew had not won any sit downs under Columbo, but Blast downplayed the losses, not wanting to stir up his wild brother. It did not work. If we have to move on that fat sucker, Mr. Joe Columbo, said Joey, we'll move on him just like we did Profaci. Whether Columbo liked Joey or not, it is incumbent upon any godfather to welcome home a family member who had just served time. Colombo sent soldiers Rocco Miraglia and Nicky Bianco to greet Joey with an envelope. Joey opened it in front of them and counted out $1,000, which amounted to $100 a year for the 10 years he had just served in the pen. It was an insult. Joey just told them, "Who needs this money?" Then told them to tell Colombo to stick it up his ass. He demanded $100,000 plus four buttons for four of his crew members. Bianco said to Miraglia as they left, "Can you believe the sense of entitlement of this guy? He really is a bats." I don't know what that means. When Joe Yak heard about Joey's demands, he told Colombo, "We never should have let him get out of the joint. We should have hit him while he was still inside." Even if Joey's attitude was warranted and his demands were justified, Colombo no longer had any other choice but to whack him. Joey had proven, while both in and out of prison, that he was born a troublemaker, unable to take orders from anyone. Colombo put Joey off, telling him he was busy with his league, and they would eventually get around to discussing his future. While Joe Yak assembled a hit team who began stalking Joey, but his movements were hard to pin down. "We heard Joe Gallo was all over town," said Yak's driver and bodyguard, Joseph Joe Fish Luparelli, "but he never stood in one place long enough for us to get him." As Joey ducked death on a daily basis, Colombo was busy prepping for his second Unity Day rally. As promised, Carlo Gambino kept the waterfront open while other mob controlled unions, including the Teamsters, were also told to keep working. With four crime families signaling their withdrawal from the League, Colombo's closest associates again pleaded with him to call off the event. Just as Cornelia begged her husband, Pompey the Great, not to go ashore in Egypt, and Calpurnia warned her husband, Julius Caesar, to stay away from the Senate. Columbo's wife urged him not to attend the rally, fearing for his safety. Anthony Colombo also pleaded with his father, telling him, "Stay home and I'll take care of it for you. We can always have another league, but I only have one father." When Crazy Joe Gallo noticed that Colombo was being set adrift by the other families, he ordered his crew to yank down Unity Day posters in storefront windows and to warn the store owners to keep their businesses open. The owners were confused. In the morning, a group of flat nosed guys hung up posters. By evening, another group of cauliflower eared guys pulled them down. Where was the unity? Early in the morning of June 28th, 1971, Colombo awoke in his modest Brooklyn home and ate a hearty breakfast with his family. The big day was upon him. After getting dressed in a white collar polo shirt and dark pants, he put on reading glasses and made last minute edits to the speech he planned to deliver at the rally. Carlo Gambino had told the politicians who were in his pocket to withdraw their names from the list of speakers, which they did. But others who were close with Colombo were scheduled to deliver speeches, including Congressman Mario Biaggi, New York City Comptroller and future Mayor Abraham Abe Beam, and Manhattan Bureau President Percy Sutton. As for entertainment, Colombo lined up his pal Sammy Davis Jr. along with Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, Tom Jones, and B.B. King. At around 10:30 a.m., Rocco Miraglia picked up Colombo at his house and drove him to Columbus Circle to highlight Colombo's contradictory role of mafia don turned activist. He carried a briefcase that contained his speech and a fully loaded 38 caliber revolver. He arrived at Columbus Circle at around 11 a.m. and waved to the crowd of 65,000 people, which was thinner than the 200,000 he was hoping for, but the band was not scheduled to strike up until noon, marking the official start of the event. There was still time for people to arrive. The towering Christopher Columbus obelisk was festooned with red, white, and green flags that fluttered in the gentle breeze as a smiling Colombo made his way toward the elevated platform. 1,500 uniformed police officers worked the crowd, which was also infiltrated by an elite undercover unit of detectives and FBI agents. 6 private ambulances decorated with a mix of Italian and American flags were on call for sunstroke victims, but everyone knew the wagons were there in case of violence. Of the dozens of photographers who clicked away with their cameras, one in particular stood out to Colombo, who nodded to one of his men and said, "Watch him." The young African American photographer Colombo had eyes on was approximately 30 feet away from him and seemed to be searching for the best camera angles to photograph Colombo. As Colombo smiled, shook hands, kissed, and interacted with the excited crowd like a candidate for public office, the photographer in question moved closer to Colombo before he swapped his camera for a handgun, dropped into a tactical shooting stance, and fired 3 bullets at Colombo from several feet away. One bullet came to rest in Colombo's jaw, another in his neck, and a third tunneled 4 inches into his brain where it settled. With 3 rounds of lead in him, Colombo clumsily reached out a hand for a police barricade before collapsing to the ground with blood streaming from his mouth and ears. After the sound of gunshots reverberated through Columbus Circle, there was an eerie silence and stillness before complete chaos broke out. Cops and civilians tackled the gunman to the ground and piled on top of him like a rugby scrum. One cop seized his wrist and smashed his hand against the ground to shake the gun loose, while another pinned his other arm to the pavement. Suddenly, 3 more gunshots rang out, piercing the gunman's heart and lungs and instantly killing him. Blood gurgled from his mouth. Fearing the gunman's body would be torn apart by the angry crowd, police loaded him into an ambulance instead of securing the crime scene, outlining his corpse and tagging evidence. Was the shooter silenced? And was the departure from police protocol intentional? Perhaps, since the second gunman has never been identified, nor do we know how he was able to fire 3 rounds, then extricate himself from a tangled pile of human limbs and escape the scene with over 1,500 police officers present. That does seem kind of strange, but it's like, whoa, what a bad era to be like in a public event. How many of these people have been shot at? Crazy. Colombo was taken to Roosevelt Hospital, where he was given 8 pints of blood, x-rayed, and rushed into emergency surgery as his wife, Lucille Jojo Colombo, and their 4 sons raced to the hospital. Surgeons removed the bullet in the middle of Colombo's brain and the slug in his neck, but decided it was best to leave the bullet in his jaw, at least for now. Colombo survived the 5-hour surgery but had suffered a fate worse than death. His brain was dysfunctional. He would never walk or talk again. Mobsters guarded the hospital's entrance and patrolled the hallways, unsure if someone would arrive to finish the job. Wherever I looked, said Joe Cantalupo Jr., there were wise guys. Sammy Davis Jr. showed up at the hospital, as did another of Columbo's close friends, Rabbi Meir Kahane of the Jewish Defense League. By noon, when the band was scheduled to begin the event, radio broadcasts announced that mob boss Joe Colombo had been shot in Columbus Circle. Anthony Colombo called a press conference at the hospital where he sounded like J. Edgar Hoover, assuring everyone that his father had been shot by one maniac acting alone. He blamed it on a deranged psychopath, the same kind that killed John Kennedy, in response to speculation that Carlo Gambino was behind the hit. Anthony told everyone that Gambino was a very dear and close friend of my father's and is a real gentleman. I'm not sure how someone could survive that. Well, yeah, I mean, so obviously severe brain damage, but it must have not hit like an artery or to block the blood flow completely. And then yeah, but the neck, yeah, the neck is kind of dicey, but I mean, I guess if you hold it and you don't let go in time and doesn't go through, um, yeah, but it's not like he survived up like um unscathed. Um, mhm. uh, and also the godfather of my 6-year-old sister. In the search of clues, Chief of Detectives Albert Seidman went to the hospital to view the dead gunman, who was lying in a cold steel rack face down with bullet holes in his back. Seidman was puzzled. It seemed as if someone had silenced the gunman just as Jack Ruby had silenced Lee Harvey Oswald. By 12:30 p.m., the Associated Press received a telephone call from someone who claimed responsibility for the shooting of Colombo on behalf of the Black Revolutionary Attack Team. Of the many Black revolutionary groups active at the time, the police had never heard of this one, which confused Seidman all the more. African Americans were, moreover, fond of Colombo, had supported him, and had shown up in droves at both of his rallies. 2 months after Joe Colombo had been shot, he was discharged from the hospital and transported to Anthony Colombo's house in Brooklyn. The family boarded up the garage and converted it into a hospital room while they renovated their weekend home in upstate New York, where they planned to transport him once the proper accommodations were completed. Consigliere Joe Yack assumed temporary control of the Colombo family, which was no longer distracted by a civil rights campaign. Joe Yack was low key to a fault. He dressed like a pauper and drove around in broken down jalopies. Not surprisingly, he shunned the limelight and did not want to be boss, especially after Colombo had drawn so much attention in the position. This was a complete departure from his normal routine and way of operating. Said one investigator. The same could be said for the family's underboss, Charlie Lemon's Minio. Like an elderly man feeding pigeons to pass the afternoon, Minio conducted most of his business from a park bench. He did not want to be boss either. As consigliere, it was Joe Yack's job to sound out the capos, and choose a new boss who they would ultimately confirm by vote. Joe Yak would then run their choice by the commission for final approval. But this was a strange affair since Gambino had put Colombo in place and was also suspected of taking him out. Knowing Gambino would demand a say in who replaced Colombo, Joe Yak appointed 39-year-old businessman and capo Vincent Vinny Alloy as acting boss. Vinny Alloy's father, Sebastian Buster Alloy, was compares with Gambino for decades, and Gambino was also Vinny's christened godfather. He smoothed lots of class, one detective said of Vinny Alloy, a good family man with 3 children, goes to church on Sunday the whole bit. That is why they gave him the family. The Capos were pleased, as was Gambino, who quickly called for a commission meeting where Alloy was unanimously approved and given a seat at the round table. Since Colombo had been neglecting the Borgata for months, Yak's next order of business was to demand an updated accounting of the family rackets. His last order of business was to whack Crazy Joe Gallo, who Yak blamed for the attempted hit on Colombo, with no evidence to support his conclusion, except that the shooter was black and Joey was known to defend black convicts in prison and help them find jobs when they got out of jail. Joey also partnered with tough black gangsters in African American neighborhoods like East New York, Bedford, Stuyvesant, and Brownsville. After being ostracized by the Colombo family, Joey vowed to start a sixth family that would include black mobsters. This is going to be an equal opportunity mob, he said of his hybrid crew. In order for his crew members to get made into his new family, Joey said he would dig up some Sicilian ancestors that they could claim relation to. No one took any of this seriously until Colombo was gunned down by an African American. Although Joe Yak was quick to pin the shooting on Joey, the Gallo crew was shocked to learn that Colombo had been shot. Pete the Greek was half asleep at home when he heard a news flash on television. A black guy shot him. He asked his wife, confused. He ran down the hallway of their building and told Kid Blast, who was still in a bathrobe yawning, where? Asked Blast before he contacted Joey and asked him if he had heard the news. Joey was just as surprised and confused as Greek and Blast. He told the crew to meet at Mondo, the midget's pool room, where Joey said, "What a bum rap they're laying on us over here." Greek felt the same way, saying, "We still don't know if Colombo was dead or what, but we knew that everyone would lay the shooting on us." Detective James O'Brien, who was surveilling President Street when Colombo was shot, said, "I don't think Joey was responsible for the shooting. I don't buy that. I didn't see him there that day, but I could tell from the reaction of the guys they weren't expecting it. I think they figured right away that they were going to be blamed for it anyway, so they better regroup. But I don't think they knew it was going to happen ahead of time." Another investigator who kept close tabs on the Colombo family said when the shooting took place, there weren't any indications Joey was involved. With targets on their backs, the Gallo crew launched their own investigation as police identified the shooter by lifting his fingerprints at the morgue. Jerome Addison Johnson was a 24-year-old drifter who was raised by his maternal grandmother in Waycross, Georgia. In 1965, he moved to New Brunswick, New Jersey to live with his mother. After graduating high school, Johnson moved to Hollywood, California to pursue his dream of becoming a movie star. He instead sold drugs, committed home burglaries, and forged checks to get by. His long criminal history included violent crimes such as assault, but he was hardly ever punished by the law. The most interesting thing about Johnson, wrote Anthony Colombo, who eventually rethought his lone nut theory, was how he almost always managed to stay out of jail. While on probation, Johnson kept adding new and serious charges to his rap sheet. Who was coming to the aid of Johnson to make these charges go away? It is now known that the FBI recruited Black informants to pose as photographers during the African American civil rights movement. Although the Bureau adamantly denied having a file on Johnson, he had been issued an FBI number. Hmm. I never heard of that. Phil the Greek? Why? Good family man. I don't know. Johnson returned to New Jersey in 1969 and began to hang out on the campus of Rutgers University, where campus police arrested him on several occasions for illegal entry into girls' dormitories. It was the age of Aquarius, and Johnson called himself Pisces Man, mastered the subject of astrology, using it as a conversation starter. As a switch hitter with a pretty good batting average, Johnson picked up men and women. Oh my God, what? Sometimes passing himself off as a university professor, other times using phony business cards that said he was a Hollywood producer. He would offer people roles in his next film, but was mostly interested in making pornographic movies. In the spring of 1970, Johnson moved to Greenwich Village, where he hung out in Washington Square Park and frequented gay bars and nightclubs owned or controlled by the Genovese or Gambino families. He survived by drug dealing and pimping and crashed his in seedy motels and rooming houses. While searching for evidence at his last known address in the village, detectives found a steamer trunk and a terribly malnourished spider monkey. Cops cracked open the trunk but found nothing of interest. Two Indian carvings, a box of incense, a few feathers, a book about astrology, and a stack of pornographic photos. Some depicting bestiality. Equal opportunity corn. I know, it's like, well, at least he has hobbies. I mean, business cards, like, no offense, I don't think it was very hard to pick up gay people in Gramercy Park at the time. Mm. The detectives found better clues inside the trousers Johnson was wearing when he was killed. In one pocket, there was an address book with 66 entries, mostly women he had dated. Cops also found blank checks with the name Bark Book Distributors, a wholesaler of pornographic books and magazines owned by Lucchese soldier Joseph Brocchini. Before the shooting of Colombo, the company's address was taken over by Club Orgy, a live adult entertainment center. Since Bark Books no longer existed, detectives never realized that Brocchini also owned Club Orgy. When the attorney on record for Bark Books was questioned by police, he simply said that the checks had been stolen. The gun Johnson used to shoot Colombo was identified in police reports as meant a meant automatic handgun, which resembled a German Luger. Since the gun was manufactured in Germany during the First World War, the cops were unable to trace the weapon. As for the murder of Johnson, several eyewitnesses reported that a police officer had shot him, or at least someone who was dressed like an officer. To get that close, said New York City Police Chief Albert Seidman, the assassin's killer must have burrowed into that pile up like a human drill. The revolver used to kill Johnson was discarded at the scene, and although it was traced to a police officer who reported him missing 7 years earlier, the cops claimed it was untraceable. When, I mean, this is what I thought from the beginning. So you got to think about, I was going to say at the time, but I think people would take issue with that. They'd be like, and still now, Stella. What I was going to say is at the time, you had a lot of police corruption, a lot of, um, even from the highest levels, right? And I mean, there was a lot of abuse in police departments of like, so to me, it makes sense that a cop shot him and then thought like, oh shit, one of our guys might get in trouble for just like killing this guy. Let's just, I don't know, do what we usually do and say we don't know. And then you don't need to look into it. But not for, I don't know if it even has to be for any more nefarious reasons than you just look like you were too quick to draw or something. I don't know. Like, why would it have to be some big ass cover up? Because they shot the guy that killed him, like when he was an active gunman anyway, unless it's just protecting their police, protecting their badge. Ugh. Yeah, free body cam. When asked how he could be sure, Seidman said, because we have the gun that killed Johnson. It's been tested by ballistics and it is not a police gun. When asked who the last owner was, Seidman said no comment on that question. Yeah, it's definitely not a police gun, okay? Not a police, just don't look here. Doesn't mean that it's not a police gun. Likely in an effort to lead the scent away from a police officer, the cops claimed that Colombo's bodyguard, Philip Chubby Rosillo, removed a revolver from Colombo's briefcase, used it to kill Johnson, then escaped the scene. But Colombo's revolver was tested and proven not to have been fired, and no one bothered to explain how Chubby retrieved the revolver, penetrated the pile, shot Johnson, then masterfully extricated himself from this human pretzel and slipped past a screen of 1,500 cops, detectives, and FBI agents who were all trained to subdue assailants as they had easily done with Johnson. Detectives believe that Johnson had hidden his handgun inside his camera case or inside the camera's empty magazine chamber. Unfortunately, the camera and its case disappeared on the day of the shooting. The missing camera was eventually dropped off at a police station by an ordinary citizen who had picked it up at the scene. He told police he did not hand it over to them at the time because he feared being mauled by the mob. He placed it in his automobile trunk and drove home. While drinking a beer in front of his television set, he and his brother in law checked the camera for film. He claimed that there was no film in it and decided to give the camera to the police, hoping they would owe him a favor. The cops traced the empty camera to the Banner Camera Shop in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The next morning, Chief Steedman dispatched two detectives to visit the shop. The owner said that Johnson had rented the camera on Saturday after writing them a fraudulent check for $23.80. Steedman did not believe that a young drifter with no press credentials could stroll into a camera shop and write a bogus check for less than 25 bucks and walk out with a $1,200 Bolex camera. He called the story a bunch of crap, but mysteriously left it at that, never investigating the shop owner to see if he was somehow connected to Johnson, to organized crime, or to any other nefarious people. Detectives also searched for a young African American woman who had been seen with Johnson at the rally. She too was carrying a camera, believed to be a 35 millimeter. It is quite possible she had been fooled into accompanying Johnson to the rally, since detectives located a number of people, all women, with the exception of one man, who Johnson had asked to assist him while he photographed the rally. By the time Johnson arrived at Columbus Circle, he had apparently found his assistant. After Johnson shot Colombo, witnesses saw this young woman hop over a police barricade. Two policemen stopped her, then let her go before she disappeared into the crowd. One cop described her as approximately 5'7", wearing a miniskirt and a sweater, while his partner said she was 5'2", wearing jeans. Actual photographs of her are believed to exist, which makes sense given all the photographs inside Columbus Circle that day, but none have surfaced, adding yet another layer of mystery to this curious affair. Colombo Capo, Carmine the Snake Persico, was eventually able to get hold of a photo of her, which he shared with his crew, hoping they could track her down and muscle her into telling them whatever she knew about Johnson. An FBI informant the FBI, inside the Colombo family, made a copy of the photo and shared it with his FBI handlers. Oddly, the Bureau buried the photo instead of searching for the woman or passing it on to the NYPD, who could have used it to break open the case. With nothing to go on, detectives leaned toward Crazy Joe Gallo as the mastermind behind the entire ordeal, which is what Joe Yak wanted everyone to believe. Joey's association with black prisoners and his reputation as an equal opportunity underworld employer cast him as the perfect suspect. Newspapers went so far as to portray Joey as the head of the Black Mafia as detectives tried to discover a link between Joey and Johnson. They contacted the wardens at Greenhaven, Auburn, and Attica state prisons, searching through their records to see if Joey had served time with any black prisoners who might have introduced him to Johnson. Why do they do this? Do they say like, oh, did he know any white people that could have done this? Just weird. Ugh. The probe proved a big waste of time, but detectives stuck with it anyhow, never stopping to consider what Joey's motive what was when, in fact, Joey made no attempt at a power grab in the hours, days, or weeks following the shooting of Colombo. A rather odd lack of initiative for someone who had supposedly masterminded a perfect coup without leaving behind a trace of evidence. As the Gallo crew tried to make sense of the shooting, they put together a short list of suspects. beginning with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who Joey said must be creaming his effing pants over the removal of a civil rights leader. However ludicrous Colombo may have been in his role, the crew did not think it beyond Hoover to have an African American kill an Italian American, hoping the Italians and blacks would lunge at each other's throats, while the rest of the crew believed if all went according to Hoover's plan, the Italian mafia would be at war with black militants. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Two groups the government desperately wanted to destroy, while the Italian American Civil Rights League would be leaderless. As it turned out, once Colombo was incapacitated, the League did indeed fizzle out. Its Madison Avenue headquarters were abandoned and debts piled up. Chief Seidman followed up on countless leads before lamenting no crime in 30 years had left me so totally confused. Of all the leads Seaman chased down, his most viable, in this author's opinion, came from a black detective in Harlem who received a telephone call to meet in broad daylight, so he asked if they could meet at night inside Central Park. Under the cover of darkness, the informant told the detective that a couple of weeks before Colombo was shot, he was contacted by a middle aged heroin dealer named Harvey Turkman, who owned a fabric store that was connected to the mob controlled garment industry. Turkman also moved bales of imported heroin that were brought into the country by mafia drug dealers via France, Corsica, and Sicily. He, in turn, supplied black drug lords who controlled the distribution networks in African American neighborhoods. Turkman's wife and kids lived in Forest Hills, Queens, while Turkman spent most of his time in Manhattan. According to the informant, Turkman did not want to be seen with him in Massachusetts or in New York, so he paid for his cab fare from Harlem to Boston, Massachusetts, where they met inside of a bar. The informant said that Turkman, who was accompanied by an Italian man and a black woman, told him that he wanted Colombo whacked at the upcoming Unity Day rally and would pay him $40,000 for the job, half upfront and the other half after Colombo was dead. The street savvy informant wanted to know why he would risk hitting Colombo at a public rally when the job could be done in a less dangerous setting. Turkman snapped at the question, telling him because we feel the effect will be best if we do it the way I just told you. Whether the we was Turkman or was Turkman and the two people he was sitting with, or a larger cabal, it was unclear to the informant, who nodded along and asked how Turkman expected him to escape alive. The black woman interjected, telling the informant that this was her responsibility. She would have plenty of blacks planted in the crowd to cause a commotion to help him escape. Turkman insisted that the job was much easier than it sounded and offered the informant 10 grand, spot cash in good faith. The informant did not want to commit, so he did not take the money and asked if he could sleep on it. He left the bar knowing the job was a suicide mission despite promises to the contrary, but he was afraid to tell the trio no, feeling that he already knew too much for them to let him live. After sleeping on it, the informant decided It was safer to roll the dice on Turkmen's wrath than get killed or arrested for murder in front of 100,000 people. The next evening, while packing a concealed handgun in case of trouble, he returned to the bar to decline Turkmen's offer. To his great relief, he saw that Turkmen had already moved on. It appeared that Turkmen was having the same discussion with another young black man who was the informant who was who the informant knew to be Jerome Johnson. The informant returned home to Harlem happy he was off the hook. Note that the informant had no idea when relating the story that Jerome Johnson, a vagabond, had rented a $1,200 Bolex camera a short walking distance from where the informant had met with Turkman. Furthermore, detectives were able to account for most of Johnson's whereabouts in the weeks leading up to the shooting, except for 48 hours, during which time the informant claimed to have seen Johnson in a Boston bar with Turkman. Chief Seidman thought the informant's story was credible enough to do some digging and found out that the man seated behind Turkman was known as Butchie, an Italian-American mobster who lived in Boston's Black Ghetto in the months leading up to the shooting of Colombo. Butchie made an irregular number of telephone calls to Brooklyn and New Jersey, where Johnson lived. Seidman may have also figured out who directed Johnson to Turkman and Butchie in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Johnson was often seen in the company of Mitchell Umbers, a hardened criminal with a record of arrests in New York and Boston. Umbers peddled pornographic material on the streets of Manhattan on behalf of the Gambino family and also frequented mob owned gay bars. Because he was trusted by both the gay community and the mob, he was nicknamed the Fairy Godfather. Seidman questioned Umbers, who was evasive. With nothing else to go on, Seidman placed an authorized wiretap on Harvey Turkman's telephone. He took extraordinary measures to keep the tap a secret. Yet, a few days after it went live, Turkman shouted into the phone that he knew the cops were listening in on his calls, who told Turkman that his telephone was tapped. I could have just been paranoid. 2 weeks before Colombo was shot at the rally, all 5 New York mob bosses were put under 24-hour surveillance. Only days after the surveillance went up, Dennis Dillon, who worked for the Organized Crime Strike Force, told one of his minions, Michael Polak, "We are going to pull surveillance off of Joe Colombo." Polak thought this was crazy and inquired as to why, but was only told, "We're just not protecting Joe Colombo at this time." After Hollywood producer Al Ruddy had met with Colombo to discuss the Godfather movie script, he had been contacted by an FBI agent who gave me his information and told me to call him if I had any trouble with the leak or Joe Colombo. He was just doing his job, said Ruddy, offering protection in case someone tried to muscle me or anything. I never called him, but he would call me from time to time to check in. The night before the rally, he called me and said, "Under no circumstances are you to be in Columbus Circle tomorrow." The way he said it, it was like an order. I didn't know what it was about. He didn't explain. He just hung up the phone. Daniel Holman, chief of the Joint Strike Force to combat organized crime, insisted it was not a mob hit. When questioned by reporters, Holman insinuated that he was basing his conclusion on more than just a hunch, but he could not elaborate. "I prefer to leave this now as my own observations," he said. "I don't want to get into my sources." The words of Dennis Dillon, Al Ruddy, and Daniel Holman pointed towards something more nefarious than an ordinary, which can also be disproved by the utter and obvious lack of planning that went into filling the power vacuum left by Colombo's removal. Crazy Joe Gallo was still walking around with his thumb up his ass. Joe Yak and Charlie Lemons did not want the top spot, nor did Vinny Alloy, who was pushed into the promotion. Since Carlo Gambino had put Joe Colombo in place, and it therefore fell on Gambino to remove Colombo, could Gambino have been working with the FBI or the CIA? I mean, here's a I'm kind of just leaning towards look, two things. One, somebody getting shot like during this time in a public place, a public figure, a public asshole. Like, I mean, your evidence so far, oh, you rented a camera for a low amount. I mean, I can't talk about the rental practices of cameras at the time. Maybe you knew the guy, or maybe like whatever. um, but the other thing is number two, the mob thing. They had no problem killing people themselves and being like ripping out their nuts and throwing them in the river. Like yeah, they weren't like, hey, the mob doesn't kill people. So if they wanted someone to do it, they would just have someone do it and not be shy about it. I don't think. If anything, it'd get the message across better. And they obviously weren't opposed to doing that. I don't understand all this. Like, well, there must be like the secret FBI, CIA connection. I mean, maybe that's because they're more secretive. But I don't know. It would be hard to whack the fairy god. I've never heard of fairy godfather, actually. But yeah, maybe you're probably right. Okay. In the early 1970s, FBI agent Anthony Villano handled top secret assets for the Bureau's top hoodlum intelligence program. In Villano's memoir, he writes about a heroin trafficker named Moish Kessler who moved skids of imported heroin for the Gambino family, as did Harvey Turkman. Once, when Kessler was arrested, he told the U.S. attorney at his arraignment, "You can't touch me, I'm CIA." Agent Villano was shocked by the statement and even more shocked when Kessler received a mysteriously light sentence for a heroin rap. A puzzled Agent Villano tried to connect the dots and wrote, "It has been gossiped that the Gambinos were the avenue of communication between the CIA and the underworld. It would be logical of the CIA not to deal with the hired help when they might go directly to the boss of bosses, Carlo Gambino." Did Agent Villano unwittingly solve the Colombo case by connecting Gambino to the CIA? Was Harvey Turkman, who knew and dealt heroin with Moish Kessler, another mafia-connected CIA asset? Was this how Turkman immediately knew that the NYPD was tapping his telephone? Was this why Jerome Johnson's killer was reported to be wearing a police uniform? And why that same killer was able to escape a twisted pile of men and a dragnet of 1,500 officers? Was this why the photo of Johnson's assistant never surfaced? Was there an elaborate plot to murder Colombo, then immediately silence the man who killed him? About 10 months into the investigation, the homicide coordinator at Manhattan South, Captain McDermott, announced an abrupt end to the Colombo case. Why would the police department decide to abandon the Colombo investigation? Asked a confused Deputy Police Commissioner Robert Daly, and who gave the order? Closing the case was heavily criticized inside the NYPD, and since no one could figure out who issued the order, the consensus was that the feds had pulled the plug. When Daly and others inquired as to exactly who was responsible for closing a hot case, Captain McDermott only said that the call came from the very top. One day, Daley later wrote in his memoir, I questioned Deputy Commissioner McCarthy, but he said he knew nothing about who had closed down the Colombo case. Whoever was ultimately responsible, it was inconceivable to Daley that a police commissioner would get involved in a homicide case. One way or another, the inference was that the commissioner was told to back off by someone more powerful. Joe Cantalupo Jr., whose father employed Colombo at Cantalupo Realty, eventually became a confidential informant and was asked by his FBI handler to see if the bedridden Colombo was truly broken beyond repair. The feds weren't sure about Colombo, said Cantalupo. They always had a lingering fear that he'd return and reorganize things and cause a whole lot of trouble again. So they pressed me to arrange to see for myself how he was. When a legal folder of documents was being delivered to Colombo's upstate home by Cantalupo Sr., Cantalupo Jr. asked if he could tag along. That day, he saw Colombo in his makeshift hospital bed, lying there like a lump with plugs in his head where he'd been shot. Cantalupo later reported to his FBI handler that he had watched Colombo's wife spoon feed him as the food dribbled over his lips and down his chin. The agent was thrilled to hear this and replied, You did good, Joe. We had to know. Chapter 27, Sticking His Head in the Noose. Whether Crazy Joe Gallo was innocent or guilty of being behind the attempted hit on Joe Colombo made no difference to Joe Yak, who attempted to hit on Joe Colombo, who ramped up his efforts to whack him, telling Joe Fish Lucarelli while grinding his teeth, I want that bastard's head. I want to roll it down President Street like a bowling ball so everyone can see it. Watching him die, I'd actually come. Okay, that's okay. That same day, Yak called on the professional photographer who photographed many of the Colombo family weddings and other celebrations. Yak isolated photos of each Gallo crew member he wanted dead and circulated them among several hit teams. But the Gallo crew, all combat veterans of the Provaci War, were not so easy to ambush, especially on President Street, where they knew every face that belonged on the block. As for Crazy Joe, he knew to stay away from anywhere he was invited, but mm, yeah, avoided Manhattan's mob infested Little Italy for several weeks. But it was in his nature to dare people, and his caution soon wore off. After being spotted at Luna's Italian restaurant on Mulberry Street, it got back to Joe Yak, who said, This guy is sticking his head in the noose. Yak told Fish to have a hit team stake out Luna's. Joe Fish stationed snipers inside an apartment with a view of the restaurant, but the plan went awry when one of the snipers accidentally squeezed off a round that went through a wall and into the apartment of a Chinese family. No one was hurt, but Yak called off the operation and again attempted to track Joey's movements, but his schedule was as schizophrenic as his mind. He constantly changed plans or forgot to show up at appointments. He would sometimes be on his way to a meeting, get a new thought in his head, and make a U turn, completely forgetting where he was originally headed. A combination of irresponsibility and vacuity was keeping him alive. The press, which had been following the Colombo family since the first Gallo rebellion, was in awe of Joey and viewed him as a hero. In an age of hippies, Vietnam War demonstrators, and the Black Panthers, Joey, with his diverse ethnic crew that included a lion and a dwarf, was seen as the little man taking on the establishment. The media coverage gained Joey VIP status at trendy restaurants and popular places like the famous Elaine's, which opened in 1963 and catered to celebrities who all wanted to be around Joey. Joey's 43rd birthday fell on April 7, 1972. Despite his underworld problems, he was in a festive mood and decided to celebrate with his second wife, Sina, and her 10-year-old daughter, Lisa, his sister, Carmela Cam Fiorello, actor Jerry Orbach and his wife, Marta, Pete the Greek and his date, Edith Russo. The group started the evening at the Copacabana, where they emptied a few bottles of champagne while listening to comedian Don Rickles beat up on blacks, Jews, and Italians. Rickles knew Joey and directed some personal jokes at him, then said, "Seriously, folks, Joey is turning 43 today. Yeah, happy birthday, Joe. God bless you. That's what, 115 in President Street years?" Following his act, Rickles visited Joey's table to pay his respects to the mafia's Che Guevara. You could see Don Rickles did those those old school roasts back in the day. And they have one on YouTube with like Reagan in like the 70s. It's pretty funny. Mm. I think Dean Martin used to do those. When the Copacabana closed, Joey was in the mood for a late night meal and suggested Chinese food. Everyone piled into Pete the Greek's large black Cadillac and headed for Chinatown. On the way there, Joey changed his mind and suggested they eat at Luna's in Little Italy. After finding that Luna's was closed, the carpool drove around in search of an open restaurant and saw the lights on at Umberto's Clam House, a newly opened, cheaply decorated seafood restaurant with butcher block tables and fishing nets strung between life preservers along the wall. The owner of Umberto's was Genovese Capo Matthew Matty the Horse Ianiello, who was standing on the sidewalk talking to Joe Fish Luparelli when Pete the Greek's car pulled up. Fish later said, "I turned my head so Gallo and the Greek couldn't get a hold of my face. They both knew me." After the car rolled to a stop, Joey asked Manny the horse, "How's the seafood? Any good?" Manny the horse, knowing there was a contract on Joey's head, took a shot at dissuading the Gallo party from eating at his place by telling Joey he had not yet been approved for his liquor license and could not serve them alcohol. Joey said they were there to eat, not drink, and told Greek to park the car. The Gallo party entered the restaurant, sat down at a table in the back, and ordered pasta, shrimp. What is this? Scungilli? What the fuck is scungilli? mussels, and calamari. Thank you, Terry, for being a member for 3 months. Mm. As they ate, Joe Fish ran over to King Wa, a Chinese restaurant on Mulberry Street owned by an Italian American, Dicky Pilato, and his Chinese American wife, Mona. Mobsters Carmine Sonny Pinto de Bias, Philip Fat Fungi Gambino, no known relation to Carlo, and two brothers, Benjamin Benny and Francisco Cisco Lo Cicero, sons of the notorious Charles the Sige Lo Cicero, who was part of the delegation that visited President Street during the hostage crisis, were seated around a square table eating late night combination platter number one, beer and lo mein. The dominant figure of this small crew was Sonny Pinto, who had a brain the size of a pinto bean, but a sharp instinct for survival and a murderous streak that dated back 20 years. Back in 1951, Sonny Pinto was playing cards on Mulberry Street, less than 2 blocks from Umberto's Clam house, when he got into a heated argument with his longtime friend and partner in crime, Michael Ericchiello. Pinto left the card game, returned with a gun, and shot Ericchiello 3 times in the head. Then, when police arrived, pretended to be distraught over Ericchiello's death while insisting that he had nothing to do with it. Though, through a combination of good acting and lousy police work, the cops let Pinto go, then realized he was the killer. In the meantime, he took it on the lam. In 1959, he turned himself in, figuring after 8 years the case was weak. But he was convicted and sentenced to die in the electric chair. He appealed the conviction and was acquitted after a second trial. Since then, Pinto was suspected of killing more people, including Joey's best friend, Ali Baba, who was shot after disembarking from a cruise ship. Joe Fish barged into King Law and said to Pinto, "Guess who's in the Clam house?" "Who?" asked Pinto. "Joe Gallo's in there with Pete the Greek." Pinto stared at Fish in disbelief, then went to a public telephone to call Joe Yak for the green light. Yak only wanted to know what in hell Pinto was waiting for. Pinto hung up the phone and said to his crew, "We're going to load up and we're going to hit him now. We'll whack him out right there." There was no time to steal cars. They would use their own. Joe Fish and Fat Fungi would park in a crashed car ready to block off the intersection or ram a patrol car, while Sonny Pinto, Benny, and Cisco would drive up in another car and go in for the kill. It was close to 5 a.m. when both cars parked outside of Umberto's, which was situated on a corner with windows on both sides. Its main entrance was on Hester Street, with a side door on Mulberry Street. From Joe Fish's vantage point, he had a clear view of the restaurant and could see Sonny Pinto dressed in a light tweed jacket approach the side entrance and swing open the door. Pinto made brief eye contact with Pete the Greek before homing in on Joey like a laser. "What the fuck is this?" Joey blurted out before Pinto raised his gun and shouted, "Die, motherfucker!" Benny and Cisco followed him in and were firing over his shoulder as Matty the horse, a decorated World War veteran, hit the floor face down with both hands over his head. Chef Salvatore LaMonica also dove for cover, as did a waiter and a half dozen other patrons. Joey's wife, Sina, threw her fur coat over her 10-year-old daughter and told her to play dead. As Joey overturned a table, then sprinted the length of the narrow restaurant. Sonny Pinto blasted away at Gallo as if he were a duck in a shooting gallery, hitting him in the elbow, the buttocks, the spine, and cutting his carotid artery, stopping the blood to the brain. Joey crashed through the front door and staggered into the street like a drunkard before he collapsed and rolled over onto his back. Oh, thank you, Rob. Not the butt. I mean, at that point, whatever. With a big smile across his face, Sonny Pinto backpedaled out of the side door, followed by Cisco and Benny. They got into the getaway car and sped off. Pete the Greek ran outside and emptied his gun into the back of their car. He then raced back inside and threatened to kill Maddie the horse for setting them up. Jesus, said Maddie, in my own place? You gotta believe me. The Greek could see he was telling the truth. He rushed outside and kneeled beside Joey, whose blue pinstripe suit was soaked in blood. His green eyes stared at nothing. Carmela was already holding Joey's head in her lap as she wailed hysterically, "It's my brother, Joey Gallo." Officers Felice Augusta and Robert Barnes were in a squad car when they heard Carmela crying and screaming. As the officers cautiously approached the commotion, they saw Pete the Greek toss his empty gun under a car. Augusta retrieved the weapon, then told his partner to call an ambulance. Greek insisted that they had no time to wait for an ambulance. Get him to the hospital, Greek yelled at the cops as he picked up Joey and laid him across the back seat of their squad car. The cops sped off, sirens blaring, as Greek tried to resuscitate Joey in the back seat. At Beekman Hospital, Joey was pronounced dead on arrival. Only then did Greek realize he had been shot in the hip and the hand. His adrenaline had masked the pain. No one else in the place had been hit, despite the fact that Sonny Pinto and his pals had squeezed off over 20 rounds in less than 10 seconds. All of the bullets inside Joey's body were from a .38, Pinto's revolver. Reporters sped to the crime scene at Umberto's Clam house and were disappointed to learn that Joey had already been taken away. Deputy Police Commissioner Robert Daly told them, Gallo made a mistake. He should have gone to bed last night. The residents of Mulberry Street peered down from windows, rooftops, and fire escapes as crime scene tape was strewn between police barricades. Most of them clammed up when asked about the Clam house. An evidence team went to work inside the restaurant, dusting for fingerprints and digging deformed slugs out of the bar and paneling as detectives questioned Maddie the horse and Chef LaMonica, both of whom said they were staring down at the floor throughout the entire ordeal, which was true. Almost incredibly, Sonny Pinto, Cisco, and Benny returned to King Law to finish their meals. What? I guess that didn't take long. And order another round of drinks. When the men were satiated, Sonny laid down in the back seat of my car, said Joe Fish, and took a nap while I drove up to Nyack, where an anxious Joe Yak was waiting to greet them. Joe Yak gave Sonny Pinto a big wet kiss on the mouth, then asked Joe Fish who else had been in the Clam house. To be sure, Joe Yak was not concerned about women and children or any other innocent patrons. He wanted to know if there were any wise guys from any other families so he could assess the political fallout. Fish told Yak that Maddie the horse was there. Yak knew that if Pinto admitted to knowingly shooting up Umberto's with the horse present, The Genovese family could demand that Pinto be put down like a horse. Pinto prudently said, I didn't see nobody but Gallo. All I saw was that fuck's face and we were shooting at him. Yak was satisfied with Pinto's excuse and told him to stick to it. He then asked Pinto, how do you know Joey's dead? We must have hit him a few times, said Pinto. And he went down. He must be dead. What about Pete the Greek? Asked Yak. Is he dead? I don't know, said Pinto. I don't think so. Why ain't he dead? Asked Yak, already dissatisfied. Maybe he is, answered Pinto. Yak turned on the radio and listened to round the clock news bulletins as Pinto lay down on a couch and dozed off. The first mention of the mayhem in Little Italy reported that Joe Gallo, head of Brooklyn's notorious Gallo gang, was reported shot. But the bulletin did not confirm that he was dead. If he's alive, Yak said to Fish, we're going to have to go to the hospital and kill him there. I didn't give a fuck how many people were around. By morning, a second news flash confirmed that Gallo was dead. We all kissed Sonny Pinto on the mouth, ew, and Joe Fish, who experienced an extra sense of relief since he no longer had to cowboy it to a hospital dressed as a doctor. As the Gallo crew met at Mondo's club to mourn Joey's death and fry on each other's shoulders, Joe Yak was tying up loose ends from his house in Nyack, or a safe house. One of Pete the Greek's bullets pierced a back tire of Sonny Pinto's getaway car, leaving it flat. Just to be safe, Yak arranged for Pinto's car to be crushed. As for the unfortunate owners of King Wah, Dickie and Mona, Yak said, these people may have to go. They seen and heard too much. And they went. Dickie Pilato died in mysterious circumstances. He drowned in 3 feet of water, which might not have been odd if he was only 2 feet tall. A week later, his wife Mona disappeared. Crazy Joe Gallo was killed a mere 10 months after Joe Colombo had been shot. An attempted hit that Gallo had been accused of but had nothing to do with. He was laid out in a funeral home in Brooklyn, dressed like a gangster in a dark blue pinstripe suit, similar to the threads he had once worn before the Rackets Committee, an appearance that pumped up his head and arguably got him into this mess. Besides his big trip to appear before Congress, Joey Gallo's underworld claim to fame was the hit on Albert Anastasia, whose birth name was Umberto, also the name of the restaurant where Joey was murdered. We cannot help but think that this is how natural justice gives itself a chuckle to keep itself sane and point out to disbelievers that its hand is sometimes slow but always firm. The Colombo and Gambino families were ordered to stay away from Joey's wake, but the Gallo crew faithfully attended. To my non-Italian readers, I can tell you that when I grew up, Italian funeral parlors were the poor man's opera house where the Italian drama was played out by the greatest of actors. My grandmother and her sisters would get a running start before throwing themselves onto a coffin, offering to exchange themselves for the dearly departed. At the Gallo wake, Joey's mother, Mary, did not disappoint. She threw herself onto the casket, screaming, take me with you. Joey's sisters joined in and heavily poured it on until a couple of uncles peeled them off the casket. I really miss my calling as an Italian. You know, I do love that Dolce & Gabbana accessories. Let's picture some of that organ. No! Me instead. Well, you can go too. The little Romeo and Juliet style. Mm. Mm. On the way to the cemetery, the long funeral procession passed Joey's headquarters on President Street, where construction workers paused and took off their hard hats like the respectful crane operators who bade farewell to Winston Churchill as his flag draped casket was carried along the thames. As Joey's casket was lowered into the ground next to Larry's, Joey's sister, Carmela, began screaming, "The streets are going to run red with blood, Joey." She was right. The first weekend after Joey was hit, 36-year-old Richard Ricky Grossman was found in the trunk of a car that was abandoned in Sheepshead Bay. He was beaten before both eyes were shot out. After the weekend on Monday, 10 April, Gennaro Caprio's skull was blasted to pieces with buckshot as he left his own restaurant. The killer was perched on the roof above him. The scarce remnants of the Gallo crew went back to the mattresses on President Street as the New York Times reported a resurgence of violence inside the Colombo family. Although the article said that both sides had an equal number of men, one side was far more invested in the fight. Joe Yak's army was made up of initiated soldiers and aspiring recruits, while the Gallo crew, under the leadership of Kid Blast, was a hybrid band of ethnicities who could not advance through the ranks of the Italian underworld and were especially demoralized without Larry and Joey around to champion their cause. Within 2 months, over a dozen men were killed, knocking the Gallo crew out of the war. The commission finally voted to break up the Gallo gang and scatter them among the five families. Kid Twist ended up with the Genovese family. Pete the Greek was given a pass for pointing a gun at Matty the horse, and after serving 10 months in prison for the bullets he fired at Sonny Pinto's getaway car, he left for Greece, where dinner plates are smashed in celebration, not by bullets. Throughout the war, Joe Yak, Joe Fish, and Sonny Pinto stayed on the lam in their hideout in Nyack. Fish ordinarily drove Yak to secret meetings in one of two cars, both of which were registered to Fish's wife. One day, Yak told Fish to have his wife pick up both cars in Nyack. Fish wondered how his wife would get there since she did not have a car left at home to drive, and further wondered how she would drive both cars home. Fish began to question Yak's motives and remembered that Yak had once told Fish to murder his wife after she filed police charges against him over a domestic dispute. Although she quickly dropped the charges, Yak remained bitter toward her. Fish now concluded that Yak was planning to kill his wife when she arrived to pick up the cars. Yak was actually planning to kill Fish, but since he did not trust Fish's wife either, he decided to kill them both. Joe Fish used creative excuses to put off killing his wife. When Fish figured out that Yak wanted him dead as well, he could not sleep a wink. One morning, Yak told Fish that a few banana wise guys were coming to visit them in Nyack. Once again, Yak told Fish to have his wife pick up the cars. Fish now wondered why Yak, who did not trust his wife to begin with, would want her around when even more wise guys were present at a secret hideaway. Fish knew that hits were often a cooperative undertaking and concluded that Yak had asked the banana mobsters to do him a favor and dispose of Fish and his wife, appealing to Yak's obsessive penchant for caution. Fish told Yak he would run out and relay the message to his wife over a public telephone. He left the safe house and drove around for a while, wondering if he was delusional. He finally decided that he was not imagining any of this and made a telephone call, not to his wife, but to Yak. "Where are you?" asked Yak. "Just riding around," said Fish. "I got a thing." "Listen," said Yak, "before you do anything stupid, come back." "No, Joe, I'm not coming back. Why you turned against me, I don't know. I love you like a brother." And you're doing this to me. Why? Because I love my wife and children? Because I didn't kill her? Have I ever dishonored anybody? Have I ever broke the code? I always done what you told me to do, except that one time, and now you want my wife to come up there? Since when do you use a man's wife to come to a hideout and pick up cars? Joe, you think I don't know what you got in mind? What are you going to do? Asked Yak, never denying the accusation and already considering the ramifications. I don't know, answered Fish. I'm just taking off for a while. A while, as in the rest of his life. Fish drove to an airport in Philadelphia and boarded a flight to California where his sister lived with her family. When Yak realized he had accidentally spooked Fish, he was beside himself with rage. He dispatched two goons to keep a close eye on Fish's wife, with instructions to kill Fish on sight, along with his wife if they were seen together. The only reason Yak did not whack his wife straight away was because he did not have the bigger fish in the net, and killing his wife would drive Fish to snitch, which Yak was not certain he was doing, or not yet certain. On April 18th, 1972, Joe Fish walked into an FBI office in Santa Ana, California, and said to the desk agent, "My name is Joe Luparelli. I'm here for protection." "From what?" asked the agent after listening to some of Joe Fish's story. The young California agent, unfamiliar with the New York mafia, assumed that a lunatic had walked in off the street. "What's a consigliere?" he asked Joe Fish, baffled. The agent finally contacted the FBI's New York office and said, "I think I've got a nut on my hands." "He's no nut," said the New York agent. "He's for real. Hang on to him." The New York office dispatched a team of agents to protect Fish's family and arranged to return Fish to New York under police protection. Before Joe Fish had even entered the FBI office in Santa Ana, Joe Yak had abandoned his hideaway in Nyack and ordered a crew of grunts to dig up every murder victim Fish had helped the Colombo family kill and bury. In the dead of night, the stinking, decomposed bodies were relocated to new grave sites. One victim, however, was discovered by the law. Joe Wagon Wheels Biscoby was a two-bit hoodlum who preyed on gutter criminals like pushers, pimps, prostitutes. One day, Wagon Wheels and his ragtag crew targeted the wrong guy, Joe Yak's brother. They robbed and beat him to within an inch of his life. When Yak found out about it, he ordered all hands on deck. The entire Colombo family went searching for Wagon Wheels with orders to bring him in alive so Yak could enjoy a slow revenge. Joe Fish found Wagon Wheels in a bar and told him he was looking to unload a bundle of stolen traveler's checks. Wagon Wheels assured Fish that he had approached the right man, which Joe Fish already knew. The next day, Fish picked up Wagon Wheels, who was dressed in a snakeskin jacket and alligator shoes. They drove to Little Italy, where Fish led Wagon Wheels into an apartment on Elizabeth Street. Instead of a bundle of traveler's checks, Wagon Wheels was blindsided by Joe Yak, Sonny Pinto, and others who slammed the door behind him and threw him to the floor. According to Fish, they strangled him with a wire as Yak repeatedly stabbed him with an ice pick that punctures organs until it got stuck in his cervical vertebrae. At some point, Sonny Pinto said in a low voice, "Keep quiet, somebody's knocking on the door." "For Christ's sake, Sonny," said Yak, "that's the guy's foot." Wagon Wheels was kicking a shoe against the floor with his last ounce of life before he expired. Fish said he was lying face down on the floor with the ice pick handle sticking out of his back. They had to use the butt of a gun to knock it loose and get it out. After Joe Yak got his revenge, the killers went for drinks to wind down. Later that evening, Joe Fish wrapped up the stiff and buried him in the basement of a building where the corpse remained interred until fish went sour and Yak had it relocated to New Jersey. But although Yak's crew of grave diggers had severed the head and hands from the body and disposed of them in different places to avoid dental recognition and fingerprinting, they buried the legs and torso in its corpse in New Jersey, dressed in a snakeskin jacket and one alligator shoe. They knew it was Joe Wagon Wheels Vescovi because of Joe Fish's detailed description of what he was wearing on the day he was killed. Besides Wagon Wheels, Joe Fish admitted to 5 or 6 other murders. He could not remember exactly how many because there were probably more, and detailed everything that happened on the night of the Gallo hit. As for Fish's wife, who had once called the police on Fish, when a detective told her that her husband had flipped, she said, I have the kids, one of them a boy in school. How am I going to explain to him about his father? It was a good question, said the detective. How do you explain to a wide eyed kid that his father is a hood who helped murder another hood? That's not what I mean, answered Miss Luparelli. I mean, how am I going to explain to my boy that his father is a squealer? In February 1974, after nearly 3 years on the run, Joe Yak surrendered to the police, knowing the cases against him were old and too weak to stand up in court. He was quickly released. Joe Pinto was eventually indicted by a Manhattan grand jury for the murder of Crazy Joe Gallo, but by then he had gone on the lam and has never returned. He is believed to have died naturally in 2011 while still at large. The Crazy Joe Gallo hit ranks up there with the greatest mob hits of all time. Even though Joey was never a boss and never even a capo, unlike Joey's original boss, Joe Profaci, who left behind an estate estimated to be worth 100 to 200 million, Joey's estate, if we can call it that, was unable to cover his own funeral expenses. His fame rested solely on his wild personality and the Gallo rebellion that challenged the mafia's old regime during a volatile period in American history that saw civil rights marches, violent prison riots, and anti war protests. The press sympathized with the public's revolutionary spirit, and the Gallo Rebellion checked off the mafia box in a long list of revolts that challenged authority on every level of society. Like Virginia Hill's mansion, which became an attraction for tourists after Benjamin Siegel was murdered there, Umberto's Clam House was pointed out by New York tour guides as the place where Crazy Joe Gallo was whacked. Matty the horse benefited from the uptick in patrons who tried to furtively look around between bites of calamari. In 1976, Bob Dylan, an icon to the counterculture movement, released an album titled Desire. One of Dylan's songs was Joey in memory of Crazy Joe Gallo. A homicide detective who tried to talk sense into Joey once said to him, one night will come out and the dead body will be yours. You're right, answered Joey, because I was never one of these guys who wants to live forever. I want to be a big winner or a big loser. One might argue that he was both. A newspaper headline following his death read, Gallo is buried. His legacy lives on. That is the end of chapter 27, but also part 4. So there's more parts. There's parts to this. I wonder how many parts it's in. Yeah, I think maybe part 4 is the last part, but there's still a bunch of chapters. Reckonings. Well, that does sound like an um, um, final part. Oh yeah, chapter 28. The return of Bobby and Hoffa. Oh, I wonder what happens to Bobby. Thinking about the scene in Goodfellas when he's super paranoid. Well, legs for days, legs for miles. Mamma mia. Following the assassination of President Kennedy, Teamster President Jimmy Hoffa no longer had Bobby Kennedy to worry about, but the prosecution's Bobby had set in motion eventually caught up with Hoffa, who was convicted in two separate trials, one in Tennessee and the other in Chicago. By 1964, Hoffa received a combined sentence of 13 years in prison. Hoffa remained free on bail as his defense team filed appeals. At the same time, Carlos Marcello, whose real estate development projects received tens of millions of dollars in loans from the Teamster Pension Fund, set up a $2 million defense fund, which was used in part to bribe witnesses into changing their previous testimony. The lead witness who had testified against Hoffa was Ed Parton, the Union thug who had once passed a lie detector test after telling the feds that Hoffa had asked him to murder Bobby Kennedy. Marcello did not send his goons to talk with Parton. Instead, he had his political contacts approach him. One of Marcello's messengers was an aide to Louisiana Governor John J. McKeithen. When the aide was later questioned as to why he spent so much time with Marcello, he said, I go to the Town and Country Motel because there's always lots of politicians there. Another one of Marcello's messengers was pay-per-play influencer D'Alton Smith, whose brother was on the State Board of Education and whose sister was on the State Insurance Commission. Through Smith, Marcello recruited the help of the most decorated American war hero of all time, Audie Murphy, who asked Parton to reverse his testimony. When Parton would not budge, Marcello tried to get Walter Sheridan to help Hoffa stay out of prison. The former head of the Get Hoffa squad and the man Hoffa had once called a slimy, sleazy rat on national television was offered $1 million in cash if he would switch sides and go to bat for Hoffa. Sheridan, who turned down the generous offer, said it was clear that money was no object if tape recordings or other information helpful to Hoffa could be produced. Before long, Justice Department officials launched a grand jury inquiry to Marcello's efforts to free Hoffa through bribery, but the little man's connections ran deep. Senator Russell Long of Louisiana swiftly threatened to get the officials indicted. If they did not desist, they backed off and Marcello was in the clear. Hoffa, however, was still heading to prison, so in the summer of 1966, he changed the Teamsters constitution so that he could remain the union's president and collect an annual salary of $100,000 while in prison, a grim reality that Hoffa was not coping with very well. The last couple of weeks before Hoffa went to jail were hellish, said one Teamster who knew him intimately. He was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He would lie on the floor and yell, I'm not going to go. Early on the rainy morning of Tuesday, March 7th, 1967, Hoffa climbed from a black Lincoln Continental and surrendered himself at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., where the media was waiting. He was handcuffed and placed in the back seat of a government sedan, wedged between two U.S. Marshals who accompanied him on the 200-mile drive to Lewisburg Penitentiary. Before departing, Hoffa spotted Clark Mullenhoff, the reporter who had once told Bobby Kennedy to target the Teamsters. Hoffa spat on Mullenhoff, his saliva splatting against the closed car window. Oh, that seems like a good enough place to stop for the night. we'll pick it up there on Saturday. What did you think of that? Very violent one tonight. So I'm buttoning my top so I don't get in trouble. Okay. All right, we good. Did this one unbutton? Okay, I'll fix that one. Okay. Oh, thank you, Terry. Call in tomorrow for my members. That will be fun because I had to miss last week because when my sister was here and everything. But it's just me and Phila. So that'll be nice. Um, um, I like to do them members only a lot, so they're a little more um close knit. Um, yeah, I told you I started watching Wednesday. I really want to see that new Alien show. It's supposed to have like on Hulu good reviews. Who's gonna watch that with me? It starts on the 12th, I think. So it's like Tuesday, but I'm excited. I think it's gonna be good. All right. I see you tomorrow. Get some rest. Oh, thank you, Jerry. I love you so much. And Jerry, you better call tomorrow. I want to hear about your week off. So get ready to tell me. All right.